Alex says, hey, I got a used $360 Squier Tele Custom. Amazed by the quality of budget guitars now. Sure. Well, because they're made the same way as high-end guitars, just with less hand time and less expensive components. Can you explain to the kiddos what budget guitars were like 25 years ago? Yes, I can. 25 years ago. God, just 20 years ago. But yeah, 25 years ago. What were budget guitars like 25 years ago? Let's back that up so we don't go into 25 years ago is 1999. And budget guitars in 1999 were actually still pretty good. So in 1999, you could get a pretty decent budget guitar, a Schecter, because back then that was still in the framework of that. But I understand what you mean. Further back than that, yes, budget guitars used to be pretty bad. They used to be basically, think about this. Think about the worst guitars you can get now, like a glary guitar. A glary guitar is essentially what may actually still a little better, but what budget guitars were like that you had to pay real money for 30, 35, 40 years ago. It's pretty bad. So bad. And then they got better at it. And what they really got better at, well, first of all, the technology caught up. So like I said, the Haas CNC machines that they use at Kiesel or they use at, Maxim Guitar Works or, whatever they're using at PRS, those machines are also at Cortec, and those are also in some of the inexpensive factories in China and in Indonesia. So, first of all, the technology is there. And then obviously they all go to uniform parts. What I mean by that is it used to be, this is really what changed. So, actually, Alex, this is probably the part you want me to tell the kiddos. That's the kids, so to speak, the younger audience members that has really changed that you may not be aware of. What really has changed is not just overseas, because there's always been overseas. There's always been that to some degree. What really changed was manufacturers that make good guitars used to make more of the guitar in that facility. So, for instance, Peavey would make its bodies, its necks, its bridges. It would cast them. It would make their own bridges, and it would make their own pickups, and they would make their own tuning keys. They would manufacture every component besides the fret wire that was still probably bought by, they probably purchased that from Dunlop. So essentially they were building, let's say 90% of the instrument. Fender also had machines stamping out bridge plates, stamping out output jack plates. So essentially, again, building a huge percentage of the guitar. So for a cheap guitar manufacturer to make a good guitar, they would have to cut the bodies, have to cut the necks. Now, of course, we're talking about anything before when Hartley Peavey started, CNC guitars. Everything was going to be cut basically by hand or on a jig. But more importantly, they would have to find, source, or build their bridges, tuning keys, and it was very expensive to make the dies. I'm sorry, I don't want to say die cut. Sorry, the dies and the stuff to make those components, like I said, or the machining it would take, or the presses. These are massive, expensive machines, so they just couldn't do it. So they would source their parts from cheap manufacturers who did just make bridges or just make tuners, and they would make them really cheap. And so you would get a guitar and all the components on it was garbage. The pickups were kind of garbage. The bridge was cheap. Everything was as cheap as they could get. And what really changed is at some point, the manufacturers, the good ones, slowly started sourcing out their parts. I don't know of a U.S. manufacturer right now making its own tuning keys. I don't think there's a single one. Fender, I think, is made by Ping, right? Gibson is Grover and Cluson. Paul Reed Smith is Hipshot. If you go through, it's going to, like I said, no one's really manufacturing a tuning key. Now, then when you get to bridges, not as the same, but it gets pretty dire. The manufacturers making their own bridges. Like I said, if you tour, I'd say 9 out of 10 factories in the U.S. building guitars, what I'm saying is if you were to tour every factory in the U.S., factory, not little shops, factory, I would say 9 out of 10 don't even have a metal shop. They're not even manufacturing. There's no machine shop. They're not machining anything anymore. They're buying all that stuff external. which makes it easy for the cheap guys because they can just do it too. They can get all those components as well, and then they get the copies of those components. So that's how they were able to really cost-savingly move the needle fast, right? Because those, tuning keys, it was, so we're talking about 25 years ago? 25 years ago, to answer your question, or to answer your statement question, 25 years ago, it was tuning keys, pickups, and bridge were probably the most expensive part of manufacturing a inexpensive guitar, because a piece of wood, you can just cut out a body. I mean, you can make a guitar think about this, you can make a guitar in your garage. You don't even need special tools. I mean, if you got a saw, right, a file, just a really coarse file, some sandpaper, I mean, you can pretty much work out the body and neck, and make a rudimentary kind of guitar out of it. I mean, tons of guitars are just made. Brian May and his father made their guitar out of a small shop. They didn't have like a huge commercial shop or anything. So you can make a guitar pretty much in your garage. And then when you get to tuning keys, pickups, and bridge is where it's going to really slow you down, because you're going to need something. You're going to need some way to manufacture those or build those. So essentially, that's the biggest change. Besides the labor, I mean, obviously going overseas for cheaper labor and all that stuff is huge, and not having to pay workman's comp and not having to pay, the EPA and all that stuff. But I mean, just the availability, the easiness of doing it. It's so easy. I mean, 25 years ago, I don't remember. No, I know, because think of this. 25 years ago, I was building basses. 25 years ago, could not buy a set of bass tuning keys for $20. 25 years ago, I couldn't. There's no way. At any kind. Not even cheap, junky ones. There was no way. There's no way. So now you can go on Amazon and get a decent set of tuning keys for $20. It's crazy. So that's a huge change. So as I said, as companies, outsource the magic, it makes it easier for people to copy it. If you enjoyed this podcast clip, you can click the playlist down below, or click one of these links right here to go to another pod clip, or you can go to the other channel, Phil McKnight, and watch the entire episode and full episodes, or stream them on Spotify, Apple, YouTube Podcast, and pretty much every platform you can find.